Record. All right, so I've blocked in everything. I'm satisfied with the proportions. A lot of it will change, but I'm in the ballpark and I can work with this. I need to get rid of all these really crap lines though. How do I do that without eliminating everything? I'm gonna use my kneaded eraser, flatten it out, and go over really light-handed. It's gonna take off the first couple layers of graphite. I can see all the lines that I wanted to keep though. They're gonna stay there. If you don't want to erase, you don't always have to erase. When we're trying to make this look relatively photographic, having some of the grid lines or a lot of the grid lines rather, is not a good idea. It's also a good lesson for you guys if you are erasing and, oh man, I can't erase enough. Maybe I'm pressing down a little hard or too hard with my underdrawing. Make sure that you can erase out. All right, like I said at the beginning of class, I'm going to be using mostly my 5B pencil and my mechanical pencil. That's an H pencil, HB pencil. If you have a mechanical one, chances are your graphite is HB. So it's a little bit of hard and a little bit of soft. You guys can use your H, just a little heavier handed, and it'll make the same exact thing. The point of this one though is to maintain a point for our details and to create hard lines that won't get softened out. All right. We're going to start blocking in the form. We've got our shape. We need to turn it into form. We use value to create our form. Simplify, simplify, simplify. Don't overthink it just yet. All the surgery is going to happen towards the end of the drawing. We're still in blocking in mode. We're just in part 2 of blocking in mode. We are adding value to our shapes. Same thing that we've done on every one of our drawings so far. If you guys want to listen to music today, go for it. Just make sure that you can still hear me talk. All right, sharp 5B. If it's not sharp, it's going to get too dark too quick. We want to be able to blend this out a lot. This is a tag board paper, so there's a little bit more tooth to it than your Bristol board. Either way, sharp pencil. The more graphite that you have exposed, the better. Shapes of my shadows. All I'm doing is starting on one side here. Weird. And I'm going to color in the shape of my shadow. I'm starting on my line, so I know that this line is my line. I'm not pressing down hard because at some point I'm probably going to want to adapt that line to give it a little bit of a bump for the shoulder. Don't give her too broad of shoulders. This entire thing is in shadow. Really lightly, I'm not pressing down hard, like I said. In shadow, I've got a harder shadow underneath my elbow here. I don't really need that line. Simple 3-dimensional cylinder. Heavy shadow on one side, lighter shadow on the other side. That lighter shadow is already done with that line. My stomach here. Anytime that I lift up my pencil, I'm going to go back to this line. So I'm looking at my reference. It fades from there out. Every time I lift my pencil, I'm going back to my original line. That's going to create a darker shadow, and then it fades out. Pressure sensitivity. Start on this line now. Fade out. Fade out. As I get further away from that line, I don't press down as hard. It doesn't come out to a very hard edge. It's not a firm edge here. It's really, it's probably not a good idea. It's really 5B. It's not a hard edge. It feathers out into the back, into this kind of back flab here. thinking of her as everything is a box and everything's in a box. This is the side plane. Then it'll change directions. You can kind of see that in your reference right here, where that rolls over. And then we see the back plane. I'm going to hold off on adding too much there, though. All right, shape my shadow, start on that shoulder. Don't be too linear with it. Don't have too many lines. It's going to be really dark. Fine with that. I can start to determine my edge here a little bit. I don't want to be heavy-handed here. This is the hardest part of this drawing. The angle of this back, this arch, this swooping back. So I'm going to add a little bit of dark, but not too much. And I went extremely heavy-handed with my underdrawing there, so we'll see if I can soften that out at all. All right, once I have that, right now I'm just focusing on the flesh. You can always go back and forth between the flesh and the fabric. That's always up to you. If you get like stuck on something, move to something else. Don't stay on one thing when it's not working, especially. You might have some revelation, some eureka moment. All right. With my hair, and again, this is being recorded so you guys can watch it after if you get lost. Last class, the hair was kind of difficult. Don't think of it as hair right now. Think of it as like an almond and then a little bit of a swooping line this way. So unfocusing my eyes as far as what I have here, and if I'm satisfied with the angle of her face, kind of comes up, I can say that I've got a wedge of flesh here, and then everything else is kind of dark there. So again, unfocusing your eyes is very strong to do here. It's a good skill to have. It's not going to ruin your eyesight. I am just going to give that a shade of gray, not heavy-handed. And looking at it, peripheral vision, looking at it in comparison to my reference, I can say, you know, I probably need to come out a little further this way. I probably need to go up a little higher with my hair here. Still, all this can be erased. I'm not pressing down hard. Her ear will just become, I don't know what that is. Her ear will be created by a darker shadow somewhere around here, and then a darker shadow underneath. And this becomes the braid. So if you don't want to draw the ear just yet, completely understandable. Give yourself a little bit of gray using the edge of the pencil so that we can blend it all out. And then the shape of her, it's probably a little high. The shape of that braid comes out the back of the head here, basically right in the middle. Just a little bit, comes back in, comes back out. I see a little bit of negative space here. So again, piece it together. Don't try and do it all in one fell swoop. Look at your negative space. There's a little bit of the background showing here. So all one solid color, not solid black though. We're going to use a heavier handed 5B and our H pencils to do that. So again, Elmo's not doing me any favors. Yeah. A little bit of shadow here. All these will be tailored afterwards. Maybe need to go up a little bit with it. Being a little bit more methodical here where the hair comes off the head, not pressing down hard. I used my H pencil, but you could use your 5B to do that too. All right, I'm in a relatively decent spot there. I'm gonna go one shade darker along the torso, maybe for a little bit more of a gut. All right, with my rag, I'm gonna make my T, so fold it up, press down, try and find a cleaner spot on your rag, preferably. You can unwind it. You can grab another paper towel, but we don't have any more rags after what's on the center table. Avoid grabbing those. All right, so I start here, and as I get into my highlight area, I'm not pressing down as hard. I'm not just blending out where I've added, I'm blending it into the manila paper too. Got a really hard line right there that probably doesn't need to be as dark. When we get into the back, it is very important, especially in foresight, to go with the flow. Think of this as fabric. Think of it as I'm not having any lines going across the back or straight up and down. It's all going along with the flow of her spine. An easy way to do that is, I know her spine's here. I've got a little bit of graphite on my my rag. Instead of adding a spine with your pencil, add it with the rag. And look at your reference, see where that spine goes, drag it all the way down. It's going to be darker here. That becomes the spine. Now, as I come out from her gut, don't press down as hard. Start back at the shadow. Don't press down as hard as you get further away. This is going to give you that kind of rounded off box shape. Same thing at the breast. Where it gets a little bit more tricky is the shoulder blade. Subtlety is everywhere in this drawing, except for in the fabric. If we're thinking of the female form, or any form for that matter, as fabric, Delp, you look lost. Yeah. When you're doing your shoulder blades, don't add those in as with your pencil. Use what's on your rag. And think of the shoulder blades as pyramids. I've got a point here. Like if I go y-axis straight down in the middle of her head, just at the apex of where the that boob triangle is, I have a little bit of a triangle headed towards my shoulder. That subtle change plus a highlight eventually will create our shoulder blade or wings. But I'm not worried about the highlight just yet. If you want to add it, go ahead and do that, but it's going to have to be blended out again anyway. The manila paper is not as bright as our white paper, and that's good. Try not to be too heavy-handed with your shoulder blades. This lady's relatively fair-skinned. Yeah, yes. This lady is relatively fair-skinned. If you go darker, that's fine. It's the same concept. If you go darker with your shadows here, you need to go a little bit darker with your highlights. Sounds oxymoronic. The entire form is blended in. There's nothing that's untreated. Where I went darker in the face there, I'll probably end up having to soften that out, or I can go a little bit darker in the background. When I do the hair, I still have a lot of, come on. still have a lot of dark to do here. Again, blending that out. I like using the rag. If you want to use your blending stump, that's fine. Just don't be too heavy-handed with it. The more heavy-handed with it you are, really the less room for mistakes that you can make, so, or that you have. All right. Repeat the process. Go back. And this is where I'm going to be a little more meticulous with my pointy pencil, your H pencil, or your mechanical pencil. I'm going to start marrying myself to these lines. I don't want to make a heavy outline, but this won't blend out quite as much. And anytime that I make a line, I'm going to fade it into the shadow that I created with my my 5B. So I'm going to marry myself to this line, this edge rather, fade it in. This is a firm edge. The inside of my arm is not a firm edge at all. It basically is a lost edge as it goes into the background. Now, if you're using your fingers to blend your graphite, it's friction. If it starts burning, stop. The point of using a hard graphite on top of a softer graphite is that it blends in a little quicker, a little easier, and it doesn't look like an outline. It's a grayer mark. If you try to do this with your 5B, chances are it would start to look very, very much so like a Sharpied outline. Same thing here. Looking at my negative space, that's a little too much in. Marry myself to this line. As I fade out, I'm not pressing down as hard. As I come up here, I can zoom in a little bit. A lot of it is really training your eyes to see subtle changes. Are we there yet, Mr. Ball? No, we're not going to be there by the time you guys graduate either. Just start getting into the habit of really focusing on subtleties, not, oh, this is black and this is white. No, there's a bunch of different shades of gray in there. There's a bunch of different highlights. Don't settle for this really noir look. Really shoot for your realism. And I need to go a little bit darker along the back here. So if I need to be a little bit more surgical, a little bit more methodical, maybe the rag's not going to do it for me, I'll use my blending stump to go a little bit darker. And I can pull out highlights galore. I gave her too much of a mark there. So keep sitting back from your drawings, do your dance. A little bit of a highlight to indicate the elbow is popping out, just like I did with the shoulder blade that you can't see because of Elmo. Just gives it some depth. It's extremely stylized here. Take the edge off that stylization by blending out your lines. And if you need to add any more graphite to a broader area, try and use the 5B. It'll go quicker. I know I need to be a bit darker here, fading out into the back, fading out into the back, always starting in your shadows and those darker shadows blending out. Fade out, fade out. I've got a really hard line, a firm shadow, a firm edge over here. If you're looking or if you're thinking about this anatomically, there's a rhythm that comes up and over, and you see a little bit of the spine here and a little bit of this back hip. It comes out a little bit further this way. It's subtle. This is a very, very subtle change. If you don't see it, that's fine. Consider trusting me. I'm not lying to you. I have a little bit more of that flesh hidden in shadow that comes out this way. Then I have the shape of my shadow from my chair coming up to about here. Again, start from your darkest spot here, fade out that way, and soften. Even though it's a firm edge, you should still try and soften it out a little bit. If you don't, it's going to look very, very graphic. That's not a terrible aesthetic, but for this particular project, we are looking for gradual transitions from dark to light, as opposed to comic booky. All right. A little bit more indication on the spine. Maybe a little bit more in my shoulder blade, not much. A little bit of indication on the trap. And you can go a little darker, we can soften it out. Also, once we do the background, a lot of this is going to be taken away. I've got a lot of value, a lot of dark in the background. That's going to make these lines go away. Hopefully, if I see them as really hard outlines, step one today was take the edge off. If I do that, I'm not pressing down hard, I'm just taking off the first couple layers of graphite. And that gives me a better indication of a line. Yep. Out of the shadows? You don't want it? Work on a smooth sheet of paper. It's different when you see it up close. So your paper has a tooth to it, unlike your Bristol board. Your paper has a tooth to it. That's going to give you that speckle. Okay. All right. I'm looking at this and I'm seeing her shoulder as a little too dramatic and a little too broad. I'm going to try and soften that out a little bit, change my angles a little bit to make her look a little less stocky. You can always do that while you're drawing, while you're working with this. All right. Hair. Hair is difficult, not gonna lie. So we need to dumb it down a lot. We need to think about it as a child would think about it. Think about it like Play-Doh. When you're drawing hair, think about designing it. And I'm gonna change the color mode on the Elmo so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Right now I have a decent shade of gray. It is a mid-value on a value scale, a good shade of gray. Relatively dark, but I can always go darker. All right, so this will show up a little bit more dramatically. You see the highlights really pop out. This is just so that you can see the lines that I'm making. All right, with my 5B, I'm looking for shadows. I don't want to draw a ton of lines. That's not how hair is done. It is done by designing it with the shapes of your shadows. So if I'm looking at my reference, I've got this dark here, pretty dark. Then as it comes around here, I get this kind of a straight line. Right now, just think of it as a straight line coming up towards your ear. And right underneath it, kind of comes around. So I have two lines. This is going to create my braid here in a minute. And right at the point here, I've got a dark wedge around the ear, comes up. And then once you have that, I think it's kind of cake. Pay attention to the flow of the hair. Everything looks like it's converging here on that line. It's going to wrap around the head. So all these lines really quickly going around the head, starts changing directions about here. You have this a little bit of a teardrop or a French curve. So as I'm starting on that line, fading up and around, it gets almost solid back here. Almost solid up top, changes directions up top. Comes up here. Now some of these lines be a little bit broader, and I'm always starting on my darkest spot and flicking up so that I have a tapering line. They're not all the same length. They're not all the same value. And then I can start marrying myself to the edge of the cranium. We've got a little bit of a part here. This is all shadow. So if I just darken that in, looking at my negative space, I got a wedge here, comes up and around. And then here is where I can be a little bit more meticulous. And I'm just going to color in circles, like the full circle. And when it gets to about here, it starts to really show the braid. For the braid, as long as we have this information up here, a little bit of information down here, all I need to do is find a sharp enough pencil to go right in the middle. So now I have 1 line, 2 lines, 3 lines, and make my diagonals. Really quick diagonals. And again, this is a hard pencil, an H pencil. That is giving the illusion of a braid opposed to something kind of ticky-tacky. I don't have to draw everything. All I'm doing is designing hair. Maybe I have some thinner lines inside of that highlight, which is going to have some flyaways in a minute. I've got a darker shadow here that will define my ear and my sideburn. Darker shadow here to define the back of my ear. There is another braid down here, so if I wanted to make just a quick C curve. It's hard to see on the Elmo. It's a little easier to see for you guys at home. If I soften any of this out, I'm doing it relatively quickly. Those of you who like to use the point of your blending stump, lucky day, feel free to do that. But I still see a little indication of highlight. If I need to see more indication of highlight, if I want to give her blonde tips or something, or highlights, then I can just come back with any of my erasers, pull out some of those highlights. Don't leave it the color of the paper, soften it out. And that is a designed haircut, as opposed to drawing each individual form, just like we did with the books, with the last drawing. Same exact thing with hair. Hold on to that for later on this semester when we talk about portraiture, especially hair. Find chunks of shadow, shapes of shadows, shapes of highlights. Render those as opposed to drawing each individual hair. This will give her a full head of hair as opposed to really stringy hair like I have. Right. Change my color again. All right. Sitting back from my drawing again. I feel like I'm in a decent spot. This looks a little bit more like what it looks like on my paper. I got a kind of a hard line here. So I want to take a little of that edge off, and just breaking that line up a little bit satisfies that. I want to marry myself a little bit more to this line. I've got a really light background, so maybe a 2H would be better to do this, so that I can blend it out a little bit later. It's just a lighter gray than my my colored, or not my colored pencil, my mechanical pencil and my 5B. All right, this shoulder is going to be a big problem for a lot of us because we think of it as a big arch. It's got a plateau on it. We'll do that when we get into our background. Let's start working with our fabric. We have two shades of fabric. We've got this white diaper looking thing, and then we have everything dark around it. We've got enough information here with that big oval looking shape, that big egg, that we can start using our chunk. If you want to use your 5B pencil, that's fine. If you want to use your chunk to go quicker, that's fine. All I'm going to do is focus on separating the dark fabric from the light fabric. Easiest and quickest rather to use your chunk anytime that you're working with fabric. Everyone listen, anytime you're working with fabric, the trick is to always go with the flow of the fabric. All my flow from this dark fabric goes with that arch, that egg. Even though there's some spots that are pretty linear, like here where we have this break, I want all that to go with the flow. So in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and just lightly color in all that dark fabric with my chunk. Every line that I make is going along that contour, along that that egg. Even in the highlights, I'm not pressing down hard. It's going to be really grainy. My graphite chunk is just flat on the paper. Get all the way up on top of the skin, on top of the flesh of the hand, on top of the flesh of the belly, on top of the flesh of the back. When I blend, samesies. Go with the flow of your fabric. If it's a little grainy, that's okay. It could be the texture of your desk. It could be the tooth of the paper. Doesn't matter. If you need to go darker, you can go darker. Every line that I make is going with the flow of the fabric, staying outside of the white fabric diaper looking thing. Rag. It's going to blend into what I had in my arm. Make sure that you are going along with the flow of the fabric. That's the biggest thing. So if you have some errant marks, some wrong marks, as long as you're going with the flow of the fabric, it's going to look all right. Always go with the flow. Just like we did with the hair, we're going to come back with our soft pencil, our 5. We're going to start creating some of these shadows. You probably lost some of your line work, but because we have this white fabric, we can really dictate where a lot of this goes. I'm going to piece this together by coming out this way, and just like I did with my hair, I'm just going to color in the shape of these shadows. So unfocus my eyes. I start to see a broader bowl looking shape here. So it comes to a point somewhere around here, and then it comes to a point about here. Why not? What's great about fabric is no one's going to know what it looks like. They just know when it looks bad. Go with the flow of the fabric. All these lines are going with the contour of my fabric. Nothing's going x-axis, nothing's really going y-axis. Everything I'm focusing on going up, and I'm creating the shape of this shadow, and then it's going to start to create the shape of this mid-tone. So I have another one that comes out here, keeps coming up, and somewhere around here, kind of like that. Why not? It's going with the flow, so it's not really going to matter too much. It's creating these cat scratch looking things, these talon scratches. Tiger, why not? It's appropriate. under the arm is where it gets a little bit more difficult. It's not a point, it kind of comes to a broad edge. Gets a little bit darker and comes in this way and really dark right up next to her. So I can define that line a little bit more. Still haven't gone back with my H pencil to marry myself to it, but it's definitely starting to define that edge a little bit more, define the contour, define this other shoulder blade a little bit. On the Elmo, it's a little bit more true to form. Javaris and Michael, e-learners, try not to have such high contrast. We'll blend this out in a minute and maybe it'll show up fine on the webcam. All right, so now I've got that and I'm sitting back and it looks all right. If I blend it, it might look a little bit better. Always blend. And then I'm saying, oh, I got a little bit more of a hard edge here. Comes down. This is going to define the far shoulder blade. A little bit more here. And this will create my line, but if I need to come back and create a line additively, start doing that. If you subtract and it looks all right, leave it. Otherwise, you can have a much harder line. Something's off. Good or bad? We can go with that. So we can go with that. Right. So starting to create these, this flow, blending stump to blend. Try not to press too hard. When you get into these midtones, don't press down as hard. It's coming up, coming up, coming up. This is adding a lot more halftones to my drawing. Right here, huh? Why? Organic and forgiving. We're not done. We're not done. As long as you have a good, like a good base, Jackson, and you can add a little bit of dark on top of it. As long as you're going with the flow. Right now, it starts to, it's really illustrative right now, but once we add the highlights into it, it'll show up a little bit better. Making sure that things are buried underneath things. So like here, instead of just outlining this, if I outline this, it's a really hard line. Make sure anytime that you outline, you fade a shadow onto whatever is being buried. So this darker fabric is being buried. I've got some spots that come out still. And this is where you can kind of start making some of these shadows up. But this white fabric is now burying this dark fabric. Add a little bit of value onto the white part of the fabric. We can still see it. And I've got a hard line coming up here, and it fades out. So start in your shadow and flick out. This broken line is going to give you a good, more realistic image. And then I can come back and say, you know, I've got a hard highlight here that's got a firm edge and drags down this way. Instead of having such an additive edge, maybe I subtract a little bit on this side. Erasing for a purpose, not erasing for the sake of erasing. So instead of erasing out low or adding lowlights, I erase out my highlights, and you could be more meticulous with your tough stick eraser. It's a little bit brighter than my skin tone. And then we're good there. There's some spots underneath where you can tailor that shadow a little bit more. So it's going to come up and drag down, or drag up rather. Change directions. Change directions. You might have another mid-tone. Hard edge to your shadows. And the more of these that you do, the more, as long as they're going with the flow of the fabric, the better. When they just look like tiger scratches, not so good. But then you have some lighter tiger scratches and some thinner ones, all going with the flow. It looks a little bit better. Cast your shadow here, still looking at your reference. Very important to maintain eye contact with your reference. Define your edge from your shadows. Eventually we'll subtract a little bit. So we're almost done for class today. We will finish this tomorrow. You've got about 3 minutes to the bell, guys. I will post the video of this class at the end of the day. Feel free to watch it if you want to take any of your work home to work on it. Awesome. If not, make sure that you're somewhere around here for class tomorrow.